from Wakefield, it's the Nolan Car at Night Show. Inviting you to join Nolan as guest this week, John Poz to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. Joining me this week is a legendary person in and of itself. Since 2015, this man has changed the landscape, not just of wrestling, but of wrestling interviews and content in particular. When scrolling through YouTube and elsewhere, you can see the laundry list of superstars and legends he's picked the minds of, which speaks to the level of work he performs on a regular basis. It's a pleasure and honor to be joined this week by the one and only Mr. JP John Paz. John, how are you?
Wow, thanks for the introduction. I'm good. Wow, I don't know if I could live up to that. It almost was like, who the hell are you talking about
Yeah.
there? But
Well,
thank you, appreciate it.
well, of course. The Insider's Edge podcast, when you did that over the summer, he gave you quite an intro. So I said, no offense to him, but I got to try a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that I can be at least halfway. I want to start this off briefly, then talk to what I really want to talk to you about. The last handful of years and have been crazy for everyone. And although your show and what you do is mainly something of this nature online, what's it like for you? What's life been like for you now that everything, all the craziness is sort of in the rearview mirror after 3 years?
It's still kind of crazy. Just life in general is
Yeah,
nuts. But I feel like for a while there, I don't know, it's like, will it ever get back to normal? Will we ever get
yeah,
back to normal? So that's one thing that I'm glad it's kind of getting back to normal,
yeah.
though there's still some crazy stuff going
Sure.
on out there. But it's slowly but surely getting back to normal.
What's one thing that John Paz has learned about himself over the last 3 years that he didn't know prior about himself prior to it?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. That's a good question. Wow, I got to think about that one. I don't know. Maybe it's that I could actually like learn things a little bit quicker than I
Sure,
realized. Like just as far as like certain things that like you almost thrust into, like editing. I wasn't that strong in editing. I mean,
sure,
I've went to school for it. I wasn't that strong, but I was like, wow, maybe I could do it. So I don't know. Maybe there's some technological stuff that I could pick
sure.
up on that I didn't previously think I could catch up on or would even be able to do. Because now I editing is like
Yeah,
bing bang, I can do it 2 seconds. So it
sure.
was one of the things where almost like testing yourself, like, I'm not that technologically savvy, but maybe I am. So maybe I'm learning that I can do some stuff I couldn't do before.
You've said in other interviews of your love for professional wrestling, the WWF, then it was known, now it's WWE, and Hulk Hogan and how he got you into the business of professional wrestling as a fan, and now you're working in the field. But for you growing up, what was relationship like in terms of wrestling, not just as a fan perspective, but possibly getting into that world of wrestling?
Yeah, I was just like obsessed with it. I didn't know how to get in or like what to do or any of that stuff when I was younger, but I was just obsessed with wrestling. I just absolutely loved it. As soon as I saw Hulk, everything changed. But even before that, my dad was like kind of into it, almost like slow played it. Like, yeah, I wasn't that
Sure.
big of a fan, but I recently found a picture of him was before I was born. It was a Polaroid, and I was born in '82, but Polaroid of him and Fabulous Moolah autographed. So I was like,
Uh,
man, he's a bigger fan. And then he later he would sell insurance
sure.
to Pedro Morales, and he told us about that. So like obviously he knows wrestling, was a fan, so
Sure.
kind of slow played it. But for me was when I like he would watch it with me and stuff. But like
Sure.
as soon as I saw Hulk, and then my cousin had the big stand up Hulk, I'm like,
Uh,
oh, this guy. I was like, gotta watch this guy. Somehow got to be a part of this and
sure.
want to be even more than a fan. It's like talk to
Sure.
these guys, work with these guys, do stuff with these guys.
Through the that Insider's Edge podcast I mentioned about your intro, you talked about how you sort of got into it within the autograph signings and convention type of scenarios. In that situation, and sure that a lot of work goes into it, but it's also, I'm sure, when you were there, that wasn't exactly where your angle was for being in the wrestling world. In that moment, how do you keep yourself motivated to do that, but also realize I know my talent's worth more than just doing this sort of stuff?
It's one of those things where it's like you want to be more involved with these guys, but though like autograph convention and stuff, it's a great connection with the guys because you're there for the extended period of time, 2, 3, 4 hours could be the entire day. So it's a great connection with them. Plus, sometimes you could do interviews with them when they're there or beforehand to promote, the autograph convention. So
Sure.
it's all kind of intertwined, but it's one of those things where to me, I never really thought about it as like good, bad, low, high, indifferent. I always just thought like it's a great connection with the guys. They can get a payday. I'm probably going to make some money.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy. But it's just to me, it was a great way to spend more time with the boys and with the
Sure.
guys, and maybe ask them some questions that they maybe can answer on a podcast or something. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You get more personal with them.
Sure.
Obviously, they're freewheeling, and you're not going to reveal some of the stuff that they tell you
Yeah.
personally. But it was like a cool thing because you basically hang out with them all day. You got to pick them at the airport, you take them out to lunch, take them out to dinner, drive them back to the airport. You hang. I mean, so it's a cool thing just to it's like a fan level kind of thing, but it's more than that because you're working with them.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a way to make more money with them. But a part of you is like, man, I want to ask him this question. I got to ask him. I may have heard him answer it from somebody else, but I got
Yeah.
to ask him this question. Or I never heard him answer this before.
Sure.
So it's cool to have that interpersonal connection and relationship with them.
Which sort of brings me to my next question of, you start, interviewing people in your podcast empire in 2015. Do you remember the moment at around that time where you realized that you were comfortable enough to get out of your shell and then start this and try to create your own niche in the podcast wrestling world?
Yeah, it's funny. Like there's like a moment where I said to myself, like, I could kind of do this and interview these guys. It's not like you're listening to somebody else and like, oh, they stink. I could do it better than them. Just like you yourself, it's just you almost don't pay attention to that. Yes, you pay attention to Conan and Colt Cabana and Bruce Pritchard who were doing it before me. I know now it's almost like everybody
Yeah.
started later on and everybody else kind of get into it. But those guys you listen to, you're like, man, that's great. I want to kind of do that, but do a little different. Maybe interview guys and just do
Sure.
interviews. But now, of course, there's so many podcasts that kind of do that same formula.
Sure.
But at that point, there really wasn't that many going on. But I
Sure.
thought, man, it's like I could do that. Plus, I have the knowledge from being a fan. Plus, I was involved a bit in the business, trained a little bit in the business, did some indie stuff. And like, I was like, not that I'm on a big level or anything, but
Sure.
like I knew stuff that maybe other people didn't know, or maybe I followed guys' careers and knew some information and just was a huge fan. You could say Mark, if you will, Dusty Rhodes. I actually said to Dusty once, I said, "Oh, I'm just a Mark, whatever." He goes, "No, no, no, baby, no, no, no." He goes, "You're a historian. Don't say Mark." I'm like, "All right, fine." Now,
Yeah.
so if Dusty Rhodes is saying it, so my God, I can't say, "Oh, I'm a Mark." So
Sure.
I might be one, but Dusty said historian, so I'm going to stick with Dusty.
Yes.
So it's one of the things where you know so much. Like I feel like I could interview these guys and get some
Sure.
questions. It would just not even be like a project. It would be something fun that I
Yeah.
love doing. So it was one of the things like, can I do it? Yes. Do I want to do it? Yes. Do I love this? Yes. Because if you
Sure.
don't really like doing it, it's going to be boring and you're going to lose,
Yeah.
and in 70 plus years that I've done this, I haven't lost any sort of like feeling of like, I don't feel like doing it this week or
Sure.
I don't feel like interviewing anybody. Like never. I'm just like, who's next? So
Yeah.
who can I get? Goldberg? Who's next, if you will.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's just you
Sure.
just keep rolling with it.
Well, I mentioned it quite briefly how the podcast industry, there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of podcasts out there, and the wrestling podcast industry over the last handful of years has there's been a lot of on there, and Conrad, his empire, and everyone you could think of has a wrestling podcast, whether it's be people, friends, just talking about stuff, they're recapping stuff, or your situation where you're interviewing people one on one, or Conrad, he's talking to people, wrestlers, about their experiences going from A to Z to present day. Being that it had a lot of people have in there doing it saturated to an extent, and you sort of mentioned it, your goal and what you thought you could provide. What was it though that you want to stick out from the others in terms of their what they was already there to be able to listen to?
Just that good content, good interviews, different guys, like a different array of guys,
Sure.
not your same interview that you heard a million times. Not necessarily a short interview either, because I see a lot of like short, quick ones.
Yeah.
That some other names were doing. It's just like, that doesn't really work. That's not enough. So
Sure.
I don't know, certain aspect of I want to be able to get some time with these guys, get some bigger names that really maybe haven't done interviews, get some
Sure.
rare guests that haven't done interviews, just kind of stick out from the pack and just do things where it's just like a constant content creation where you just stick out from the pack just because you are
Sure.
very consistent and you always have your shows. Like now we do, I have shows every Tuesdays and Thursdays as far as interviews were concerned. I do other shows too, but as far as interviews, I do it every Tuesday. It's a flagship, and then I do a feature episode on Thursday. I want to be very consistent. Nobody else is doing that, and other people could do more interviews, less interviews, but there's not that consistency. So I want to be
Sure.
the consistent guy, and I want to get on everybody, new, young, old, legend, but especially focus on some of the rare names that people are like, wow, I haven't heard that name in a while. Or holy shit, where'd you find him? Like that kind of thing.
Sure. And I experienced this, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm comparing myself to you in any regards or anyone else out there, but like anything else, you have to start somewhere at the beginning. And as the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase says, everybody's got a price. And for you, and I've realized this sort of with some of the actors I've had on, from The Sopranos and their time is worth money. But for you starting out, how did you go about that in terms of planning who you could get on to then say, oh, I've had these people, but then realize, oh, realistically, these are the people I have to sort of get on instead of trying to shoot already for the moon people.
When I first started, my first ever interview was Jeff Jarrett, which was
Okay,
shocking because before that I was just writing for a blog and stuff. And
sure,
so I sent them some of the interviews. I did like Nigel McGuinness and Adam Pearson. A bunch of guys people would definitely recognize and know their names, but that was just in written form. And it was just like for a blog, for a sports thing. And it wasn't anything big, but I mentioned it to Jeff and he's like, yeah, I'll give you a shot. Why not? Somebody once upon a time, 40 years ago, whatever it was, he goes, gave me a shot. And
yeah,
really, I mean, he was in the business, but obviously somebody's got to give him a chance and opportunity, not
sure,
not just his dad or his grandmother, but somebody's got to. So he's like, yeah, I'll give you a shot. So we did the interview, and it kind of was rolling from there. But then it was like, who could I get? Then you get ignored by some names, and then you kind of settle in. You're like, okay, I'm brand new, I'm just starting. Let's not shoot for the moon yet. I want to. You got to start certain here. But then start slowly climbing the ladder. Like Jeff
sure,
is an awesome starting point. It's almost like, wow, you start off the, but then you realize like not everybody's like Jeff, where they're going to give
sure,
you a shot and an opportunity. So you have to almost do some guys, some indie level guys, some guys you're familiar with, some guys you might know from doing the autograph circuit and in the scene. Friends with some guys like Justin Credible was my buddy for years, and just some guys you can get the interview and talk to them and do some certain things, but like don't shoot for the moon. Like you got to build the base first. Like I had somebody
sure,
recently was saying, "Oh, I've only been doing it 2 years. I want to interview this, this, and this." I'm like, slow down. Just
yes,
you can get there, but just build your
sure,
reputation and just build yourself up to that. Because sometimes it might happen right away. You might get lucky. Somebody want to promote something, or you might reach them at a certain time. But for the most part, just build yourself up. So I did a lot of indie guys, and I did a bunch of ROH guys. But then here and there, I would try to sprinkle in the legends, like George the Animal Steel was very early on. I did Joe Malenko, and then Joe Malenko kind of hooked me up with Dusty, and then I did Dusty Rhodes. So that was like, holy shit, I'm moving so quick. I'm
yeah,
moving up quicker than I thought. Kind of got lucky, but then stayed true to my roots too. It's like I'm still going to do the indie guy, still going to do this,
sure,
but I'm going to still try. Not you don't just say, oh, they're out of my realm. You can still try, but don't get yourself up and excited like, oh,
sure,
I got this person. I'm gonna go for this person.
yeah,
So it's a very slow procedure. Sometimes, honestly, sometimes you just got to get really lucky, and
sure,
just like Dusty. I mean, that's just total luck. Like, holy
yeah,
shit, this is all Dusty Rhodes. Holy shit, we've only been on like 6 months. I'm getting Dusty Rhodes. I mean, this is 7 months, whatever it was. It's just amazing. But you have to have a starting point and just not. It's not like your role or know your place, but just know that that's your niche or
sure,
that's the level. Still try, but stay kind of where you are
yeah.
and then climb the ladder.
Well, and that's another thing that admirable about you, but also myself. I've had where I'm from in Rhode Island. The college basketball team is more well known than the football team, and there are guys on there who are some of the best athletes that have come through the area in a long time, but they're busy. They have other commitments, so their time is more valuable. So I've interviewed guys who were on the team and they're good athletes, better than myself, but the guys aren't as well known. And then I've used those as sort of, okay, if I have these guys on, I can say I've had these people from this era, and then that builds up and say, oh, hey, it's worth my time. Oh, I provide links or a list of people I've had on. They say, oh, this guy's credible. I'll give him some time, and then of course you may not get in contact with them. They may not reply back, so you sort of say, I'll get back in a month or a few months or so. Besides the long form interviews that you do, you also have a few other podcasts that you do with other wrestling legends.
Right.
And for that situation, as I just said, people are busy. They don't have to do. They've done thousands of millions of interviews. What does that say about you in terms of your quality of work, but also what their story is willing to be shared about?
Well, I think also it's a thing where you kind of develop a relationship with those guys too. Not just wrestling. I mean, maybe it goes a little bit beyond wrestling, but you have like a personal relationship with them. You're buddies with them, friends with them. So it's one of the things where they get comfortable around you. So it's not like, oh, I have to do the show. It's like they want to do the show. They like talking about wrestling. They like you. They're you're buddies with them. So it's kind of just an easy transition. But some of the guys, I mean, they get so busy that they don't have time for it. So you got to be flexible too. You can't just be like, no, this is when we record. You just got to be open and flexible. If they can't do it one week, you got to try to maybe record two the following week, or there's ways around it, but just be
Sure.
flexible. But also you have to put some time in. Like you have to be buddies with them. Like I've known Dr. Tom for years. I've known Kevin Sullivan for years. Shane Douglas I've known forever, for God, for a long time. Even back when I was buddies with, well, still buddies with Just Incredible PJ. We used to go to the shows, and Shane even remembered PJ was wrestling Shane. God, this was for Ring of Honor, a JPW Ring of Honor, and he sliced his hand open, and PJ literally glued it together.
Wow.
And I remember Shane came up to me because he's like, "John, you're PJ's buddy." And this was even before I really knew him. And he was like, "You got to make sure he goes to the doctor. You don't just tape up that." So, and years later, Shane remembered that. So there's some equity you build up
Sure.
with these guys, or either traveling with them, or hanging out with them, or being friends with another wrestler. Then you kind of become friends with them. So it's one of the things where you don't just assume like, I'm just going to message this guy and we're going to do a podcast together. You got to give him a pitch. You should
Sure.
probably be friendly with him or close with them, or maybe a buddy of yours is close with them, and maybe you have some phone calls and some stuff in between. But really, it's one of the things where another like interpersonal relationship. I think once you build a bond there, it makes it a lot easier to get a lot, things done as far as recording more podcasts and even creating shows.
Sure. This may be a hard thing maybe to answer in terms of differentiating from all of them, but what does like, so it might be hard to answer, so if you don't have a good enough answer, that's okay. But with those, there's a handful of ones you do with certain different wrestlers, and they all, or managers or whatever it may be, and they all have their difference about them, and they all bring a different element to the wrestling view. What do they bring to the table that maybe the other ones don't bring? So maybe what does Tom Pritchard bring to the podcast world that Kevin Sullivan does, or Kevin compared to Shane, and so on and so forth?
That's why I love wrestling. There's so much like variety, like the buffet. There's so much differences. You would think like, oh, they're both like this. For instance, Kevin and Dr. And they're both old school wrestlers. Kind of from that same generation. Not really the same age, just about 10 years apart. But they're close in
Sure.
that generation. Oh, they got completely different views. Dr. Tom was a trainer. Not only was he a great wrestler, he was a trainer for WWE. So he trained The Rock, he trained Kurt Angle, he trained Vince McMahon, he trained Shane McMahon. It's a completely different viewpoint. I mean, he worked backstage for WWF. He was a road agent, this and that. Kevin did some of those things, but Kevin is really a wrestler who was, big time name. Obviously had many great relationship wrestling, but he was the booker. He was in
Yeah.
charge of WCW. He was writing the show. He was putting the show together, putting the matches together. He has a completely different perspective because, first of all, Dr. Tom WWF, Kevin Sullivan, more you related
Yeah.
for WCW, but he was the booker. He created the NWO. He created the real 83 weeks of dominance. I know obviously Bischoff's in charge, but Bischoff needs guys under him
Sure.
like Kevin to write the show, put the show together, convince Hogan to turn heel and create the NWO, which
Sure.
was game changing, the legit game changing, changed the wrestling business forever, and really created the Attitude Era off piggybacking off of the NWO. So, and really, the Monday Night Wars was huge, and
Sure.
not that many people watching wrestling compared to then. So just completely game changer. So Kevin offers a completely different insight than Dr. Tom. Even if I'll bring up some current things I've noticed, Kevin likes some of AEW, and like for instance, Dr. Tom was like, I didn't like that, or that that's too different than what I'm used to as far as wrestling. And Kevin is more open minded to some of that crazy stuff that we see,
Sure.
like the pizza guy coming out, and like Dr. Tom. I don't even really like that stuff either. It's too
Sure.
corny for me. But Kevin's like, oh, it's okay, it's fun, and like so you get a completely different perspective from both guys.
What was your research process like in terms of maybe not just the one-on-one interviews, but then maybe with the Dr. Tom and Kevin Sullivan type of podcast that you do?
I do a lot of stuff as far as research. Like, let's say you spend a day or half a day, but not like 6 hours straight on it. Like, you kind of come back to it because I noticed even certain things. You do some research, you search online. There's many different like search and not search engines, but many different sites that has great stuff as far as wrestling. Like they have great content, great historical value, like stuff that the Dave Meltzers of the world that obviously kept a great historical record of everything. So I mean, there's that all over the site. But you have to pick and choose kind of
Sure.
what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. And being a fan for so long, you kind of know a little
Sure.
bit. It's like, yeah, that's bullshit. That's not true. Or maybe that is bullshit, but I want to bring it up and see what the guys say about it. Or, oh, that's an interesting tidbit. I didn't know that. But you got to do your research. But I like to do it and then come back to it because then I
Sure.
feel like you have open eyes again. It's like new eyes looking at it. So then you might find something you missed the first time or something you didn't think of or whatever. But I just like to use a few different sites and a few different people and bounce off of that, and not just use one site and that's it, or one piece of information that's it, just kind of go
Sure.
all over. But also being a fan for so long, I like to also use my memory as far as like what, not as far as like totally relying on it, but it's like what was the feeling when that happened? Like if we're talking about pay-per-view or a match or so, it's like, man, I remember I love that match. Sometimes if you have time, obviously you go back and you watch the pay-per-view or go back and watch
Yeah.
the matches, the finishes again. You're like, wow, that was a different feeling, or you might have the same feeling. So I like if also to have like a fan. I know Conrad says it too. It's like to have that fan perspective is great because it's almost like you're the listener or the viewer.
Sure.
They're the fan. You know what I mean? They're
Sure.
listening for a reason. So you want to almost take their side and be the fan. So I want to almost in my head be like, man, what feeling did I have? Like Heavenly Bodies against the Steiner brothers, SummerSlam '93. That match was awesome. I love that match. Does it hold up? Yes, it does. I rewatched it. It's awesome. But I remember as a kid loving it. So it's one of the things where I like kind of using my own stuff and then bouncing it off of some research
Sure.
I do. But I noticed some people, which is like a huge pet peeve, like don't do any research.
Yeah.
Hate that. That's just
Yeah.
like you're like you're not even trying, you're not
Sure.
bothering, or you're not even like really into it. Like it's just crazy. Sometimes, yes, if you're like you're a huge fan or historian, that stuff you could probably remember it and bring it
Sure.
back. But I like to jog my own memory, like like Larry Zabisco's. Like I know he was AWA champion, but who did he beat? I don't remember all the title. So you try to
Sure.
just I don't know, jog your memory almost, so to speak. So even if I know stuff, even if I interviewed the guy before, even if I think I know everything, I just like to do a little bit of research. Or like with Kevin, we're watching a WCW pay per view. I love WCW. Watch all those pay per views. I have them all on tape. I transfer them over to DVD, so that means I rewatched them all. I mean, I just was like obsessed with WCW, well, wrestling in general, but WCW. So I know the shows, but I'm like, nah, I want to make sure I'm remembering this
Sure.
correctly, or I make sure it was really good, or if I was crazy looking at it from young eyes, thinking like, "What the hell did I think that was good? That sucked." So you got to do research for sure.
Well, I think it's a balance of it, being the historian aspect and then also being the fan perspective, because it gives you two different ways of trying to conduct the interview. Because if it's from a fan perspective, that's fine and all, but then also it's tough because then it may be perceived as you're just doing it to clout chase or whatever it may be, and then brag, oh, I've had this person, and then you have a smaller person trying to do it and they're working the way up, and then it's not necessarily fair. But then historian, you're proving it to the person that it's worth their time and that, hey, they know their stuff, and it's not just someone from a national broadcast company who was doing the interview. I Before we did this today earlier, this afternoon, I watched your interview with Hulk Hogan you did, and how you had talked about how all the stuff you have on the wall behind you and
Yep.
all that jazz, and how he was appreciative of that. You talked about King Kong Bundy and his top people, and if he could wrestle today, who'd he like to wrestle? And that situation, and you had said on Insider's Edge how with that interview you were although you didn't show it, you were very very nervous about that because he's your hero, and that's how you got into
Yeah.
the wrestling business. In that aspect, how do you balance that in terms of getting someone of that nature onto your show? Because at some point you get the bigger names, you get the people who have a little bit more worth to then show, hey, I can have you on it. Was that difficult for you early on, or is that something you naturally could figure out?
It is difficult at first too because you're such a fan. I mean, you really. I mean, I'm a huge Mark for sure. You could say historian and kind of joke around and all that other stuff, but I'm a huge fan of these guys. Been a fan since the mid '80s, so it's like, man, I love these guys. And when you get Hulk on, it's like, holy shit! Like beforehand, you're like, wow, nervous. Wow, holy crap, this is Hulk. Don't really get nervous too much doing the interviews anymore. When I first started, like, I definitely you kind of you get the nerves, or if you start getting the bigger names, like, oh shit, George Animal Steel, don't screw this up. This
Yeah.
better be good. We got Kane on early on. It's like, oh damn, Dusty Rhodes was like one of the first times I was like, holy shit, Dusty, huge Dusty fan, huge
Sure.
mark for Dusty. So I was like, holy shit. So you just got to calm your nerves and realize, like, you know, they're respectful of you to a certain extent because they agreed to come on. So it's
Yeah.
not like you have to be like, hitting home runs at the park. Just relax, be yourself,
Sure.
calm down or whatever. Like with Hulk, nervous as hell for him. But when I got on, I was talking to him, just like, what would I ask him as,
Yeah.
of course you do overdo it on the research for Hulk. Like I had
Sure.
a page of stuff knowing I only had a few minutes with him, but it's like, I don't care. Like, I'm going to do the research anyway and almost have too much research,
Sure.
but I'm going to relax myself. I know it's Hulk, but I'm like, how would I act and how would I react if we're just having a beer, shooting the shit, and
Sure.
just hanging out? So it's like just relax. So yes, very nervous with Hulk, but as soon as I actually was talking to him, just calm yourself down. Like I used to play football and stuff. I used to play sports for the game. Like, oh, you're nervous, you're worried, blah blah.
Yeah.
As soon as the first hit happens, everything disappears and it's
Sure.
over. As soon as you get that first word in, or Hulk's like, "What's up, brother?"
Yeah.
You're all right. Focus. You got to
Yeah.
focus. Like, enough being a mark, enough being nervous. Like, you have to ask him questions now. So you
Sure.
kind of just got to get over it. It's almost like, as soon as that bell rings, you got to focus in on that test and
Exactly.
knock it out of the park.
Interviews like Hulk Hogan's, although it's brief, and you had an interview with Ric Flair, which went on for what was it, 30 minutes or so, about
Yeah,
talking about
about 35 minutes.
talking
Yeah.
about his comic book, and that's a decent amount of interview for something that most of my interviews are around that time, or it tried to at least get to that point. That's 30 minutes. Then you mentioned Eric Watts on Insider's Edge, which was a very long time, and you've done countless of interviews of various different degrees. For you, though, in that situation, whether it be a long form, and you talked about the research you do over research the person, whether it's a short amount of time or a long period of time, compared to now, how do you deal with, compared to the beginning, I should say, how do you deal with that situation where the time amount isn't what you should expect, but it's just whatever you're given? How do you deal with it in the sense of providing a good enough story?
You gotta almost hit the high spots, if you will. If you're, a wrestling fan, that's like, you gotta hit the big stuff, and maybe the generic stuff, kind of, because you want to not be the generic interview guy, but you make sure you hit the good points, or hit the pressing questions, or hit the questions that are buzzworthy, if you will, or you're going to get a good answer from. But when I first was starting, I would always like obsessed with time. It's got to be a certain amount of time.
Sure.
It is what it is, and if the guy only gives you a certain amount of time, that's fine. I've noticed too that I've had guys on that they said you only have 20 minutes. Sometimes they say 18, sometimes they say 22. If you stick to that time and you don't go over, and they're very like particular about it, they'll be back. And I've had a
Sure.
guy who came back 7 times. He just keeps coming back because I stuck to the time. This guy's professional. He'll stick to the times. He knows my time is
Sure.
valuable. So you have to do that. Some guys I've had on, like Jacques Rougeau, would be like, "Hey, you got 10 minutes." And he's just working you to see what you say. Sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
We went on for an hour and a half. So you kind of know something. You got to be smart about it. The guy really says, "Hey, listen, pause. Got 18 minutes. Can we knock this out?" Like, what, you have to be true.
Yeah.
Talking to a huge name, WWE Hall of Famer, huge name. Interviewed a few times, close with him. He emailed me not that long ago, and he said, "Hey, stay in touch," and blah blah, because he said that was very professional. You were literally stuck to the time that I gave you.
Sure.
He had to go to a funeral. I didn't know the reason,
Yeah.
but he told me that he had to go to a funeral. Like, he literally had to go, so he'd make it there on time. So I was like, okay. Like, I know, like, like, some guys would be like, "Oh, I'm gonna stretch it. I got this guy on." It's like,
Sure.
I don't know. To me, you got to be respectful of their time. They're
Sure.
respectful enough of you to come on. You got to be respectful of their time, but also don't like sweat it. You probably can get them on again, or
Yeah.
they're probably going to be like, "Wow, that was really great of you." Like, this guy, this Hall of Famer, emails me out of the blue, stay in touch or whatever. I was like, okay, okay,
Yeah.
sure, definitely stay in touch. But he was very appreciative of the fact that stuck to the time. And he's like, "Thanks, man. I needed to get out of there. Appreciate it." So don't go overboard either. I mean,
Sure.
you can, certain guys like Eric Watts, like you said, like, he didn't give, like, he would just talk. Like, you asked him a question, he gave an awesome answer.
Sure.
So you're like, hell, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna get as many awesome answers as I can get. So he'll give you a great interview, like, kind of no matter what. I remember Mark Coleman, UFC Hall of Famer, one of the greatest fighters. I love Mark Coleman. He gave great answers. We went on forever. So I mean, it kind of depends on the guy, but you got to be respectful of their time.
Being that you've done this for a new handful of years now, nearly 10 years, you've done countless interviews, that hundreds of interviews. How do you make sure that what you're putting out there, the content you're putting out there, is still fresh and different and unique compared to the other people out there?
That's always a tough thing. I mean, you try and you try to do some things up and change some things up and spice it up. Like, used to do an intro beforehand, and I was like, "Yeah, it might be taking too long." And I was asking a few people, like, "Yeah, it might be too much time between when the show starts and when the interview is." So, yeah, I kind of got rid of that. I didn't like that too much. It's almost like, you're talking about the interview, and people are like, "Oh, just get to the interview." So
Sure.
one of the things, so there's things you have to do, whether it be maybe a music change or an outro change, an intro. There's always little things you could do to kind of keep it fresh or keep it new. But I feel like with the content with wrestling, you almost want to, I don't know, you want to have different guys on and different subjects, maybe guys you haven't heard of, but also guys that are popular now or newsworthy now, or
Sure.
guys that, where people be like, "Oh shit, I want to check out that interview." Like, I just interviewed Greg Gagne, who's a wrestling legend,
Sure.
but big many years ago. AWA, of course, his dad and him own the AWA. Obviously, Vern Gagne's his dad is a legend, but it's like, that's a great interview because you haven't heard from him in a while, haven't done an interview, so people will be interested in that. Like, so you got to keep it fresh, but also you could throw in some guys that just for you that you love
Yeah,
and that you're
sure.
going to interview. But you also want to make sure that the content is like content that people will be interested in,
Sure.
and so it may be Gon is on, but you ask him about some current things, and he's working on some wrestling figures now, or what does he think about the current product? What does he think about Vince having to retire? Like, so you want to keep it fresh, even if you have an older guy on, and get the perspective of today's wrestling. So that's always like a good thing when you're creating content. Is like, yes, you want to think about the past, but think about the future, and also think about the present. Like, what are people interested in right now?
One thing that I sort of have experienced doing this, and I'm sure you have as well, especially when you were starting out, is planning stuff out. And you had mentioned projects that you've worked on where you're thinking, oh, hopefully at this point, winter, spring, whatever it may be, this will be released. And for me, I sort of as a doing this a young person doing this starting out sort of the last 2 years of almost doing it. It's not where you can have someone on right away, a big star, music athlete, whatever it may be. You have to sort of bid your time and build that puzzle as we talked about, and you eventually get to it. So you got to plan out 4 or 5 episodes, 6 episodes down the line, so you can have them up there, and then it releases, and you can wait for those to be available for other people to come on. For you though, in your situation of your podcast and things you work on, how far down the line do you plan out, not just in terms of conveniency, but also with guests who maybe have a bigger name than others?
I like to plan it out just a few months if I can, but I always in pencil. I mean, you're right in pen, but it's one of the things where you might be able to cross this person out. This person's promoting something this week, and you just got them on, or hey, can you get this out by a certain date? Or hey, the pay per view is on Sunday. Can you get this out? So you always have to be flexible and be willing to change it. But to me, I like to have a lot in the can. Like I like to record a bunch of interviews this way, if there's a lull, because there's always going to be a lull, there's always going
Sure,
to be a cold streak, there's always going to be holidays or whatever coming up. So I like to have a bunch in the can, kind of write each day out of like where they're going to fit, and then be flexible enough to say, nope, this needs to go here, this needs to go there.
sure,
But that doesn't mean you're done with the interviews. You could still schedule interviews, do
sure,
interviews. You just have to plug and play where
sure.
you think it's applicable.
Well, that's sort of what I've done in the last few weeks or so. I had released maybe like 5 or 6 in a row on YouTube. Sure, that chewed up my computer and was overheating like a crashed car, but I had them all out at a time so that you can sort of take a breather, because that's a lot, planning out, doing research, and doing it 4, 5, 6, 3 interviews in a row. But then you have that out, so if someone doesn't get back to you in time, you have a month and a half before you can reach out again, say, oh yeah, can we do this? And now you have it. So then you run into situations where, oh shoot, so and so did not reach back out to me. I can then release this one intended for the week after. I can release it nowadays in sort of another comparison type of thing. That situation, although you've had success with getting people on, I'm sure there have also been people who don't have interest or can't do it at the moment. How do you go about that nowadays with people who you think, oh yeah, this would be a great guest, but then it turns out you can't get in contact with them, or they say, no, I'm not going to do it?
I always just say, move on. Like I have a list of guys, literally this gigantic list. A buddy of mine was like laughing, but oh, it's so stupid. You creating lists. And I always think it's good to create a list. Remember Cody Rhodes created that list of all the
Yeah,
guys he wanted to wrestle and check. I know. I always thought like that. That's a good thing to do and create lists. It's almost like a goal. Like I want to get this guy on, but you don't press on it. You don't obsess over it, but
sure,
you just keep in your mind like I got to get back to him. Certain guests, I'm like, oh, this is easy. He's promoting something, and then they can't do it. They're not available. It's like, oh man, like that didn't work out. So what?
sure,
Move on to the next one and just keep them in the back of your mind. Maybe something else will pop up, or maybe they want to promote something else, or there might be a different avenue to get in contact with him and talk to him. So don't give up on it. Maybe put it on a note, put it to the side, but also don't obsess over it either. Be like, oh, that sucks. Don't take it personally either. I mean,
sure,
these guys are really busy guys for the most part, and they're probably doing a million other things, and maybe they can't even remember doing some of the stuff that they want to do. I mean, sometimes I can't even remember putting out the garbage. Oh, but they,
sure.
so these guys are,
Yeah,
it's nothing personal. They just might not remember. They might be a little flaky. I mean, there's so many different things. So just to me, just don't take it personal, but keep it in the back of your mind. Maybe they want to promote something later
sure,
on, or maybe you can find something, or maybe you see something online randomly pop up on Twitter. Something like, oh, they're going to want to promote that. Let's try it
sure.
again.
Well, there's one guy that I've been trying to get on here who's a coach at a school near me who again played at the college I just graduated from last spring, and he had coached at one school. I'd reached out to the middle person to say, hey, I've been doing this since then. I've had these people on blah 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 blah. I was wondering if you had time for 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes to do it. got nothing back. Once or twice, three times I checked out again, got nothing back. So I waited, didn't take that personal. Then he went to a different school and I reached out again. I got nothing. But the thing is, I've had other people who he's played with on teams and I tag him in the thing to say, hey, look at, I have this. And if you see it and you have interest, then you can do it. Still haven't got anything. It's obviously frustrating. It's frustrating when you can't get somebody, but you just
Right.
say, no, there have been other guys who have reached out for weeks and weeks and said, hey, just wondering, see if you saw my email from a month ago, whatever it was. If you have interest, great. No worries. If you don't get anything, you move on. And there was one guy recently that spoke out to me that had played with my favorite group, the Beach Boys, years ago, like decades ago, in nearly 50 years ago in the 70s. I emailed him. I said, hopefully this is the right email. He's not like he's on social media, so it's hard to get out to them. And I emailed him. It took a few days. He got back and he said, unfortunately, that was like 50 years ago, and I don't really remember a whole lot of the stuff. So best of luck to you whenever it is. And that's a moment where it's frustrating because there's stuff to talk about, but that he may not remember specifically what you're asking. So you sort of just have to move on. You can't take offense to it because they can't control it, and you can be mad inside, but outside you're saying, move on. I'll go to the next person, which then brings apart the point of planning out in advance of situations like that. As I mentioned, that in that situation, dealing with people who were around maybe years ago, not Larry Zabisco, I'm sure he still has all of his marbles, but for guys who have been around the business, who have done interviews, I remember I had seen an interview that Paul Orndorff had done, and you could tell stuff was sort of going into a darker, sad situation with him and how he ended up passing away. And when you're interviewing guys who are of the older demographic in the business, and it may seem the challenge of not being able to put out or say coherent or things, or maybe say specific events that happened. How do you go about then in terms of making sure that conversation is being carried maybe more towards a little bit yourself?
Yeah, see, and I've done that before too. Speaking to a lot of older guys, spoken to a couple guys that were 80, 85, 88, almost 90, old school wrestler guys. So you want to make sure they're okay with it. Sometimes, like if their family, if they live with their family, like, is it okay we do this interview? Yeah, of course. Like they're fine. Or they love to do it. They want to talk about old wrestling. So, like you said with that guy, maybe he just didn't want to do it. Maybe his memory really is bad. Maybe they're nervous, like about certain things. They don't want to talk about it, or if they don't remember, it's kind of embarrassing. So
Yeah.
obviously, you just don't take that personally, but you also want to cater to them and like they might not remember. Hey, remember June 1st? Because as a fan, we remember everything. But
Yeah.
remember June 1st, 1982. Like they're not going to remember. You have to almost speak in more generalities.
Sure.
But sometimes I just spoke with Terry Funk not that long ago, and it's crazy because people were talking about his memory, and he was laughing
Yeah.
because he said it's more short term. His memory isn't
Sure.
good. Long term,
Yeah.
it was great. So I said, okay, Terry, let's do this. Like he's laughing about it. He goes, but hey, keep my name out there and blah blah, and have people think that I'm losing my marbles. He goes, it's great. I'm Terry
Yeah.
Funk. Who cares,
Sure.
So I said, I go, random date in '93 in Japan, but he remembered it and was telling the
Wow.
story. I was like, so it's like, see, even some guys you think don't have all their faculties, or they're joking around about, oh, I'm losing my mind. Like maybe they're being crazy like a fox, like Terry Funk,
Sure. Yeah.
or being self-deprecating, or just maybe just just being just the way they are. But
Sure.
I was like, oh my god, it's like so. He's like, yeah. He goes, but he goes, honestly, I don't remember what I ate for dinner last night. Like it was funny. It's like, wow. It's like, okay, so he's 77 years old. Of
Yeah.
course, that's going to happen with anybody that's older. Their memories just aren't as good as they were. But it's just crazy. His recall talking about something from 1993, which was 30 years ago, was like spot on. I'm like, oh my god. I was like, and do you remember this? He's like, oh my god. He's like that guy, and like he would go on. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Sure. In life, nothing, as not to get grim again, but nothing lasts forever. And you've been doing this for a while. What's the end goal in terms of you doing, your podcast, the Two Man Power Trip Empire? Would you ever consider doing it in person, or is it something that you like keeping how it is? And how would you sort of like to end the ride that you've been on with Two Man Power Trip Empire?
To me, I kind of don't mind. I've done a bunch of them in person. I don't really mind it. But I don't know, for some reason, I like this, because I'm home.
Sure.
Sometimes I got my research in front of me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to ask questions and kind of riff. Sometimes in person, it's like, oh, you may not, you should know off the top of your head and just
Sure.
roll with the conversation. But sometimes you forget some key points. I don't know why, and obviously that shouldn't be a problem, and it hasn't been. But in my head, I'm always like, oh, but I kind of like to have
Sure.
that baby, that I have that research. I can hold on to it. I'm comfortable, sitting in my chair with my drinks and like. But
Sure.
I don't mind doing them in person either. I just feel like sometimes you can get more out of them when it's like this because they're in their environment, I'm in my environment, it's
Sure.
more relaxed. Sometimes when you're doing it in person, it can tend to be shorter,
Yeah.
and there's people around. Sometimes they might get distracted, or it might ruin it, or it just might seem like, okay, what was that? 15 minutes? Okay, let's wrap it up. I don't know. I like it better this way,
Sure.
and I always joke around about end games. Like, oh, once I interview this guy, yeah, that I'm done. But I don't know, like, when I'd be done or what the end game is. I guess
Sure.
once I interview everybody, I guess that would be like
Yeah.
the end game. But I was literally compiling a list of wants again, of guys I want to get, like goals. I found another like 15 names that I was like, I definitely got to get, and like
Sure.
it one of the things where there's so many wrestlers and so many guys that I have interest in, and so many guys I'm interested in, and even maybe some guys that just have a great story that I'd love to talk to. That I don't even know if I don't see an end game, and I don't see where maybe it could end. But there's a couple guys I joke around like, oh, if I interview Bret Hart, I'm quitting, or
Yeah.
if I get Brian Danielson on, I could probably be happy and be over. But I used to say that about Hulk too, and then I just kept going,
Yeah.
and stuff. So I don't know about an end game specifically. I'd love to do it until until I get bored of it, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, like, hey, if the Rolling Stones can perform for 60 years at the age of 80, might as well keep chugging along and doing what
Yeah.
you enjoy doing.
Yep.
You just mentioned, compiling a list of people you had, and that's what I sort of did when I first started out. Then, cross some names out that unrealistic at first. At this point, with the laundry list of people you've had on, both big names and maybe not necessarily as big names as Hulk Hogan, where do you go next in terms of what you want to have, people you want to have on, for your own kick, but also what you think would be a good story to hear for people outside the world who may not necessarily know about them?
Man, there's like guys that I just think about like, man, I wish they would call me back, or I wish I can get in touch with them. I wish we could do something. I was just talking to a buddy of mine that's buddies with Rick Martel,
Oh,
the model Rick Martel.
yeah.
I talked to him, and I was looking. I saw the message from 2016. We were going back and forth. He really didn't want to do interviews then. He didn't end up doing any. And I never got him on. But it was funny. It's one of the things like, so close yet so
Yeah.
far away, because he's like, I don't really want to do it. And he was just explaining to me what was going on in his life.
Yeah.
He's very comfortable. He's doing very well. He doesn't really need wrestling. Not that it's a negative. It's just like, I'm doing um, his many different business ventures. I don't. He probably wouldn't want me to mention, but
Yeah.
he had other business ventures. He
Sure.
was being very successful, and quite frankly, he was pretty rich from doing it. So he's like, I don't really need to do it. He's like, nothing against you. I don't really want to do interviews. But we had a great conversation over the phone, and just kind of going back and forth. And he's like, man, I haven't done signings in a long time, and it's not really something I'm interested in right now. I'm just so busy, and I think his daughter was going through college. Like, I mean, he was just so busy doing all these different things that
Sure.
wrestling wasn't on mind. But he was somebody I'm like, man, 6 years later, I'm like, Martel, I got to get him. So I messaged my buddy. My buddy talked to him, and he's like, no, not now. He did a private signing, which was my buddy went to his house and he did the signing, but nothing. Just took some pictures, but that was it. And he looked great. He looked like Rick Martel of old, just obviously older.
Sure.
But he's just not doing anything. So it's like, okay, he's on the top of my list. I'm going to keep him there, but I'm going to put him on the back burner. He's not
Yeah.
interested right now. Maybe in the future, maybe I can get lucky, or maybe he changes his mind,
Yeah.
or maybe something happens. But definitely going to keep him in mind.
Sure.
Nails is another guy, wrestler
Okay.
Nails. Oh my, like, damn, call me back, you bastard! Like, just he won't call me back. And a buddy of mine said the same thing. Won't call me back. I was like, is that his number? Yes, that's his number. Not interested. Like, oh man, like, so there's a couple guys that are on my list, very high on my list. Those two are rare as hell, but those are guys that hadn't done anything for a while. So it's one of the things where I'm very interested. Max Payne, Mountain Rock. He was one of those guys for a while. Finally, I got him on for about 2 hours, but he started doing a lot of other shows too, and he kind of was made less rare. But he was a guy on my list for a long time.
Sure.
So there's guys on my list that I wish would do stuff, have their numbers, have a connection to them. Not that they're ignoring me; they're just not interested. There's other guys like Nails who's flat out ignoring me,
Sure.
but I have his correct number, and he's just not interested.
Well, speaking of that, and those who you want to have on now at this point that you were able to get to, they've been trying to get. Besides that, though, on top of that, though, I should say, is there any project that maybe you want to work on a movie or a wrestling type of docu series, whatever it may be, or even someone you want to have on besides Brian Danielson or Rick Martel or Nails or someone of that nature that you think that'd be worth their time, but it'd also be worth my time as well.
Definitely want to start getting into them. Not necessarily books and documentaries. I was the executive producer on the Del Wilkes documentary, the Patriot documentary
Oh,
that came out by my buddy Michael Elliott, who is part of High Spots now, but he was in Elbow Productions. Awesome documentary for anybody who hasn't seen it. So was getting into that a little bit. I was working on a Just Incredible documentary that ended, but somebody else ended up taking it over. Thank God, because it was such a man, so much work and stuff going into that. Like when you're doing the podcast and everything else, it's like there's too much to do, too much going on. I need, somebody else to do that stuff. But I'd love to do documentaries or movies or stuff like that. I mean, that would be awesome. But really, I want to kind of go into the book realm and do some books, because I feel like you can get more information and really do some diving. And that might be antiquated and maybe old to some, but I don't know. That's what I kind of want to get into and kind of get into that world. And that's what I'm kind of interested in. But interview wise, Brian Danielson, Rick Martel, Bret Hart, Nails. Did I say Booker T? Booker T, who I 5 times. Somehow never got him out. Like those are the guys I am super interested in. The Steiner brothers. Somehow I was actually figuring out, because I always say I did 600 interviews. I was like, nope, 700. I was actually counting. It's closer to 1,000 almost that I've done. So it's actually more than I thought. But I never had the Steiner brothers on. They're my favorite tag team ever. So there are guys out there that I absolutely love and I would love to do something with, even if it's a quick, short interview, work a book with them. I mean, whatever it is, there's guys out there that I'm interested in that I love, that I would love to do something with and interview them.
Well, and that keeps you going to then push forward to keep doing it, instead of saying, yes, I can't get 5 people to get on, I'm going to stop doing it for a while. I'm going to, reboot at some later point, and then you end up not doing it. It gives you the motivation to say, okay, I'm going to keep pushing. And 6 months from now, I'll reach back out to Nails or Rick Martel and say, hey, interested? No worries if not. Before we go on again, I want to thank you so much, John, for doing this. It's been a fun trip for me. I want to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So in this game is, I thought a few names or people or places or things that have some connection to my guest, and have to do their best to say a word or two or sentence, whatever they want. It best comes to mind when they hear the thing. So are you ready?
Yes, one word, right? Only
one,
word?
1, 2, whatever you feel, whatever best comes to mind. The first one, the Northeast.
Home.
Wrestling.
The best.
Success.
Love to get more of it.
Hulk Hogan.
God. A God.
Ric Flair.
Icon.
Podcasting.
Love doing it.
And last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all live in called Earth, John Poz.
Wrestling fan who absolutely loves the business and a minor historian, a little bit of a historian.
Well, as long as you find a passion in life, that's all that matters. Well, sir, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me about your career and your experiences within the world of podcast and content creation. It was a treat for me. So thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man. Thank you for reaching out.
Well, in the words out there, if you enjoy this, because who the hell went down the line when John wins a whatever the term is for winning award for his book, whether it be Peabody Award or a Academy Award for his next documentary on a wrestler, say, holy shit, I should have subscribed back then. So subscribe, follow, comment, share all that fun jazz. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Car at Night Show. No, Nolan Car at Night, and an Instagram, Nolan Car at Night Show. John, is there anything that you'd like to put out there, share, or have people look out for in the near future with what you're doing?
Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com and patreon.com/tmptempire. Got some great stuff coming out. Jim Johnston, who's a huge name. People should know that. The wrestling theme creator. Yeah. He'll be on soon. Really, really good, fun interview with him. He was interested in doing some more stuff. So hopefully some more stuff with him down the line. But that's a biggie that just had on, to me, huge.
Sure. Well, in the words of Johnny Carson, the dean of talk shows such as this, I bid you a heartfelt good night. Take care, and I'll see you soon again.